out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to the 149th episode of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. Brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf, and I will be joined, par usual, by my partner in crime from the East Coast of the United States of America, Gary Action Jackson. And longtime listeners know that we are passionate about rock and roll. We love classic rock, hard rock, prog rock, heavy metal, early MTV, the stuff we grew up on in the 80s. And we like to compare bands that make it in the UK but don't in the US and vice versa. It's always an interesting dichotomy to us. And we just want to know everything, right? You want to know every great band, every member of every great band, all the albums, all the songs, who wrote them, where were they recorded, what do they mean? And it's really hard to know everything. Everybody's got bits and blind spots that they don't know anything about. Certainly they've got bands and albums that they don't know everything about. So we're going to try this new segment that we call On First Listen, where we take an album that we have never listened to before, that maybe people have recommended or we've seen on lists as this is the great top 10 all-time prog rock album, or this is the best album that so-and-so ever made. Maybe we just don't know it. Maybe we didn't hear it growing up. It wasn't on MTV, it wasn't on rock radio, and we don't know it. So we're going to do this on a somewhat regular basis where we pick an album that has been recommended to us, or it's something that's been on our radar for years, and for whatever reason, we'd never gotten to it before. We never had a chance to listen to it. Of course, now with Spotify and streaming services, you can really listen to anything that touch your fingers. When we were growing up, someone had to have it. Either you had to buy it, or a friend had to, or an older brother, cousin, your parents had to have it in their collection. If not, you may not hear a lot of great albums out there. And we decided to start with a band that we don't know a whole lot about, and that's Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Despite the fact that we love Carl Palmer because he was in Asia and he was on episode number 80 of the Ugly American Werewolf in London, talking about Asia and a little bit about ELP, we don't really know anything about Emerson, Lake and Palmer. We know a couple of the radio hits they had in America, but we don't own any of their records. We didn't listen to them growing up. And we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of Brain Salad Surgery. And of course, I'd seen it in the record stores for years. It has a very interesting cover, which we'll get into on the show. Never really knew what the meaning of Brain Salad Surgery was. We'll also get into that on the show. And there is one song on there that you know, but you probably didn't know the name. I know I didn't. It was played very well on classic rock radio, but I never knew what it was called. So this is our inaugural On First Listen with Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Brain Salad Surgery. Now, before we get into it, a couple little bits of business. One, we always like to mention how proud we are to be members of the Pantheon Podcast family, a network of about 100 different shows, music related. Not all rock and roll. There really is something in there for everyone. And pop culture, go to pantheonpodcast.com or follow at PantheonPods. And we want you to go visit our killer sponsors, rarevinyl.com. Guys, I know a lot of you are record collectors out there, and rarevinyl.com has over 250,000 items in stock. They've been doing this for 40 years. They take incredible care to collect these things, to purchase them, and then ship them all over the world. Wherever you are, get it to you in pristine condition. So if you're an Emerson, Lake and Palmer fan looking for first printing of Brain Salad Surgery or Trilogy or Tarkus or one of their great albums, or maybe a single, or maybe a rare import that you just can't seem to find anywhere else, go to rarevinyl.com, and then whatever you buy, you can save 10% with the code UGLY. Now that's a one-time code, so don't just get one £6 single. Go get something that's rare. Go get something that's hard to find. Holidays are coming up. Get yourself something and then say, honey, wrap this up and put it under the tree for me, right? It's rarevinyl.com. Use code UGLY. Save yourself 10%. I know they've got some great Emerson, Lake and Palmer stuff. And back to the band, Greg Lake is a little bit of a pariah in our midst as far as we're big Asia fans. And the whole Asia in Asia experience, which was the big satellite broadcast on MTV in December of 1983, well, it wasn't great because he doesn't sound exactly like John Wetton. Now, that's not his fault. John Wetton got kicked out of the band because he was having issues. So they still had to do this show, and Greg really helped him pull off in like 5 or 6 weeks. He's really a professional rock star for helping that happen. But because it didn't sound right, I was like, Greg Lake, whatever. Well, listening to this album gives me a better appreciation of Greg as a singer, as a songwriter, and as an instrumentalist. And everyone, Keith Emerson, Carl Palmer, and Greg Lake really shine throughout this. It's a bit of an undertaking. You got to dig into this. You got to listen very intently. It's more classical, more jazzy, and more of an epic than your typical rock album. But it's got some real highlights in there, and we're going to go track by track here. So this is our inaugural On First Listen with Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Brain Salad Surgery, right here on The Wolf. So kind of something we have been thinking about for a long time here, Jackson, is to try this thing where we listen to an album for the first time. Something that either we've been curious about for a long time or someone had recommended to us. We're like, okay, yeah, it's not really my thing, but one day I'll get to it. But, for guys who want to know everything and all the minutiae details, it's easy to do stuff on bands that you know and you love. And it's like, maybe I haven't heard everything from the Rolling Stones back to front, but I know it all pretty well. So you doing a rare one of theirs or one of those that we don't know very well, that would be easy. But to take something that we've really never listened to, and maybe even by a band that we don't know very well, it's a little bit of a challenge.
Yes. To me, it's like going through this record. It's almost like trying to learn a new language or listen to something in another language that, if you know how to speak English, Spanish is not so bad. It's kind of the same. French, okay, I can get that. But this is like trying to learn
Dutch. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, something that's not, it's not what I'm used to. It's not what I usually like. And so it was definitely one of those things. Probably if we had not done this show, I don't know if I ever would have listened to this record back to front because it's just so different to me.
I know, I'm with you there. And what I was going to say was, kind of to start, the question, I guess, is, how did you hear about Emerson, Lake and Palmer? How did you hear about Brain Salad Surgery?
The track that everybody knows, but no one knows the name to.
Yeah. You've heard on the radio every few days on classic rock radio.
That is correct.
And you're like, all right, well, play that Welcome Back, My Friend song. What do you think the name is? I don't know, Show That Never Ends, Come Inside, something like that. No. That's not it. It's called Karn Evil First Impression Part 2. I'm sorry, Karn Evil 9 First Impression Part 2. It just rolls off the tongue.
So yeah, that's the only song that I had ever heard on this one. And so, but I know it's a huge record. I know it's a huge prog rock kind of cornerstone of how that was built. And I know Emerson, Lake and Palmer are regarded as top-notch musicians, top-notch composers. So this was one of those things where let's just put your head down and get into this thing.
Yeah. And this time, 1973, because it comes out late 73, this is a pretty classic time for British prog rock, as far as, Pink Floyd's releasing Dark Side of the Moon. Genesis is releasing Foxtrot. Mm-hmm. And Emerson, Lake and Palmer are releasing their fourth album here, Brain Salad Surgery. After a little bit of a success on Trilogy, their third album, they went and bought an old theater that could be their rehearsal space and the headquarters. They started a new record label, Manticore, so they wouldn't have all the pressures of Atlantic, yelling down their throats or whatever, and they could help other artists they like get signed and things like that. So they're obviously doing well. I think their tour from Trilogy did very well, which gave them the opportunity to buy the theater and buy themselves some time to put into this, not to mention buy all this crazy new equipment for Keith Emerson to play with.
Yeah, that's one of the things to me that I didn't really realize. It's three guys. I knew what they did. I didn't realize that Emerson was basically the composer, the driving force on the actual putting the music together. I know Lake did the vocal, and Carl Palmer, the lyrics, correct. And Palmer did some of the arranging, and definitely I would imagine that even though it says music by Emerson, he had to write his parts. There's no way you're making that up. Like, he's just grooving with what you're playing. But what I didn't know is I thought Tommy Lee was cool in, what was that, 89, when he did the spinning drum kit and Going Upside Down.
It might have been 87 even, yeah.
In that point in time. Apparently Keith Emerson had a suspended grand piano that did about the same thing in 1973.
Crazy.
So, yeah, this show was off the wall. And the other thing I didn't know is that Palmer had a 2-ton drum kit that was built by British Steel. And that's it just this massive undertaking to get this thing from point A to point B.
Yeah, and it spun around too, right? Carl's kit would spin around as well, so they were really taking this seriously. And so, but then they broke up at the end of the 70s, obviously, and we know Carl Palmer from Asia.
Right.
So we didn't really grow up listening to Emerson, Lake and Palmer because they had been gone for a while. This was their big song. Lucky Man was also obviously pretty big. They play that on the radio. But this is a big song, but nobody knows what the title of it is. And they've been gone for a while, so we don't really know what they are. Plus, this is thinking person's music, right? And that's never going to be popular with most of America, right? That's not going to get you on MTV and things like that. However, the cover we have to talk about a little bit here.
Yeah, let's start with that. Yes,
let's start because I'd seen that for years. Right, you go into the record store, you flip through stuff. I don't know who these Emerson, Lake and Palmer guys are. Tarkus, okay, that's kind of a cool cover. It's like an armadillo that's really a tank. I kind of like that. What is this? What is this? So it's basically like it's a skull, like a mechanical thing, but it's over a beautiful woman's face, done by none other than H.R. Geiger, the German artist who, I think he's German. I would say he's most famous for the design of Alien, the movie Alien, right?
Correct, which I didn't know at the time. Even looking at this, I'm like, wow, that looks a lot like Alien. And sure enough, yes, he did Alien. And I think he also did at least one of the Danzig covers from like the late or early 90s. And it's kind of got that same Alien look to it. So it's very dark, very cool to look at. And it doesn't say, it says ELP on it, but nowhere does it say brain salad surgery there. And maybe we need to talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple things to talk about there. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's another thing on the cover that I never saw until it was pointed out to me in making this.
Right.
Yeah. Making this episode.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're going to have to get just a little dirty here, guys. Usually we don't go blue on this show, but it's not our fault.
This is for art's sake. This
exactly.
is descriptive.
It's historical, and we're kind of compelled to talk about it here. So what we're talking about is,
maybe you want to start with the original.
The original. What was the original title? Tell me what the original title was there, Jackson.
The original working title was "Whip Some Skull in Ya," and that is a euphemism for a sexual act that a woman performs with her mouth.
Fellatio, as the Italians call it. Yes,
correct. And apparently, and I had thought about this before.
Is it "Whip Some Skull in 'em" or "Whip Some Skull at 'em"?
I thought it was Inya, but I could be wrong. But that's we're paraphrasing here.
Okay.
But there's a Dr. John song that references brain salad surgery, giving you a little brain salad surgery, and that's where they got this from. It's basically the same thing. We're talking about it. We're talking about the same thing.
Just need a little brain salad surgery.
Yeah, that was his big song. I was in the right place.
Yeah.
But it must have been a wrong time. That was a great song. I never really picked that part out of it because I can't always, through his thick accent there, I can't always tell what he's saying, But yeah, a little brain salad surgery. Okay, so that's what it means. And then yes, if you look at plus it was also made into a gatefold that you could open like two doors, open in the middle and open that way, right? So it kind of had the line through the L and the ELP and then up through the middle of the skull, which would reveal the woman. Now, on the bottom of the skull and mechanical part, there's a big, thick, we'll call it a beam. It's kind of a cylindrical beam going up.
You can say it's a shaft.
It's a shaft. There you go. It's a shaft. That's right. And then apparently you could see the head of the shaft, if you know what I'm saying out there, guys, the top of the shaft, right under the woman's face. Well, if they give it to the record company, they say that is pornographic and we are not going to release it. So they go back to Geiger and say, okay, you need to take this out of here because we can't put it on the record. He's like, nope, that's my art and I'm not changing it. You can take it or you can leave it, period. So they had to go to some British artists to kind of airbrush it out so there's not the tip of a cock in the middle. I made you spit your water, man. That's awesome.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That almost went all over the electronics here.
That would have been great. So that's not like in the middle of their cover, So it's kind of it's whited out and there's kind of, stuff around it that if you look really hard, you might be able to make it out. But
I'll tell you now that it's been pointed out to me, it's a lot easier to see. And how they even got that. Yeah. How they got that out to the record company or out to the stores in 73 is pretty impressive.
Shocking, really.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's impressive. And then it's also kind of like a Led Zeppelin Houses of the Holy thing, in that there was a song, Brain Salad Surgery, that they wrote kind of at the end of the sessions that they did not put on the original record, along with another one that had the name is longer than the song. It's When the Apple Blossoms Bloom in the Windmills of Your Mind, I'll Be Your Valentine. Okay, guys. All right, just calm down. All right, we know you're so smart and everything, but just take it easy. But all right, but I mean, this went gold in America back when gold was still as high as you could get. It was before platinum was created. Went gold in Britain, and I think that the British press took to it more at the beginning, like, oh, look at what these boys can do. Whereas in America, they're like, what the hell is all this? You're kind of all over the place here. This is kind of ridiculous. I think it has aged very well. I think in retrospect, when people look back at it, they're like, okay, look at what they were doing here. Look at how Emerson incorporated all this new technology, like the Moog Apollo, that nobody else had, but that they could afford to make all these great sounds.
Did he was instrumental in designing that, right? Or he had some hand in that? Like, I think he had one of the first ones or the first one.
He had the first one, I think. Okay. Yeah.
And it just looks monstrous. It's probably
12 feet tall. I mean, I don't know. I mean, how do they get it in and out? It must have taken 5 big strong guys. I don't know. I mean, it's impressive. And then he has to have all his other mini Moogs and all the other stuff all around him, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you have to be impressed by the talent of the group. Of course, we love Carl Palmer. He had been in Atomic Rooster before that, The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, which we all know by Fire. And, of course, Greg Lake was the lead singer, bass player in the original version of King Crimson, who you think, Jackson, might be another candidate for On First Listen, maybe.
I think that's a good idea. I think that's another one where, huge footprint that we are not super familiar with.
Exactly. So, and then obviously we know he did the Asia in Asia of December of 83, filling in for John Wetton. And that's kind of how he first came on our radar. But this is considered, I mean, look, Carl had writing credits on the other ELP records leading up to this. He really doesn't get any here except for some arrangement stuff and the percussion movement in Toccata, which is the second song. He didn't really get any writing credit, but he still says that this is his favorite ELP record. So by that recommendation, I felt, well, if Carl says so, we should probably give it a look-see.
And I think it is what we were talking about before. There's no way that Emerson came to him with the drum parts. I don't believe that. I mean, it may have been a deal where the keyboard stuff was already, or the skeleton was already there, and then he filled in. But there's no way. There's no way anybody else than a drummer wrote these parts.
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Now, Greg Lake, as had been the case previously, he produced it, but they had a Chris Kimsey as their engineer who would go on to do some production work with our favorite, the Glimmer Twins, which is pretty cool. They recorded it at Olympic, which is amazing, Zeppelin, all the great people who have recorded Olympic over the years, Advision also, and they mixed it in Air. So they were obviously pretty big time, pretty successful to be able to afford to do all this.
Yeah, and that's one thing I didn't really realize either, is how big they were at that point in time to command all this stuff, to leave the record label and start their own, and even pick up some other people to jump on that bandwagon. Yeah, these guys were at the top of their game in 72, 73.
Yeah, and doing big tours, arena tours, headlining. I'm like, I had no idea. Was Lucky Man that big of a hit? I guess it was, Yeah.
And I think for those who appreciate this kind of music, the prog rock people, this is pure prog. This is what you would ask for if you were looking for something like this. Like, who is the top of the mountain? It's got to be ELP is up there on Mount Rushmore.
That's right.
Probably just one of the heads is all three of them, because you can't have. But
That's right. Or no, one of the heads is the H.R. Geiger head, and everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. And then King Crimson might have the dude screaming on Court of the Crimson King. And Yes would have, I don't know what they would have. Tales from Topographic Oceans. What would be the good Yes?
Yeah, maybe The World there from the Topographic Oceans. Or no, from
Fragile. The World for Fragile might not be bad. Anyway, we're not melding that, so we don't have to worry about it.
Hi, this is Carl Palmer, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf.
Let's get into the first song, Jerusalem, which of course they lifted the lyrics from William Blake, an 18th, 19th century English poet who I know you and I studied quite a bit while we were in college.
Correct. Would often recite it from memory.
Goodness gracious. Come on, guys. If you're trying to get to America, you got to dumb it down a little bit. There's only two things I know about William Blake. One is Susan Sarandon quoted him in Bull Durham when she was having a fight with Kevin Costner. He's like, what do you mean William Blake? She's like, I mean William Blake. He's like, who are you? Like, what do you do? Do you have a job?
Who dresses you? I mean, do you think this is a little excessive for the Carolina League?
The road of excess leads to the Palace of Wisdom, William Blake.
What, William Blake?
William Blake.
What, William Blake?
William Blake.
What do you mean, William Blake?
I mean William Blake.
Who are you? I mean, do you have a job?
I teach part-time at Alamance Junior College. English 101 and beginning composition.
That's the only time I ever heard about it. But then when I moved to London, my favorite place to be in London is Primrose Hill, which is right just north of Regent's Park. Just north of Regent's Park, and the zoo is in Regent's Park, and there's all these great places to be in Regent's Park. Just north of that is a smaller park called Primrose Hill, and it is a hill. It goes way up there because London's fairly flat. But then there's this great big spot, and I would walk over there most every day. I would walk the dog over there a lot. I would listen to podcasts over there, get my steps in. And at the top, there's kind of this circular, stones, and it has, a quote by William Blake where it was, I have conversed with the spiritual sun. I saw him on Primrose Hill. They have that etched up there. And so anyone can go see it. Great views as you look south. You can see down towards the river. You can see the London Eye. You can see the Shard. You can see everything down there. And so it's just a kind of a great vantage point. And of course, you're looking over Regent's Park as well. It's pretty great. And I would go there a lot. And so those are my two associations with William Blake, other than now this song, Jerusalem, which was also adapted by a 1916 hymn by Sir Hubert Parry. Of course, we both knew that before we did research for the show.
Correct. What am I, an idiot?
Yeah. So
Don't answer that.
The opening is very proggy by Emerson. I mean, this is like just straight out of the gate, like you know what you're getting into.
Right. Even though it sounds, I mean, it's okay. So the title is Jerusalem. I didn't realize this was a big song in England, like almost the national hymn. So I think when they did this, there was a little bit of backlash, like, what are you doing? You're taking this and making it commercial. But so, I mean, I never knew that before. But so it starts off, it does sound very church-like, but then you've got Palmer in the back who's just wailing on the drums. So those two things, they go nicely together, but it kind of lets you in on what you're in for on this deal.
Yeah, they chose Jerusalem as the first single, and it was released about a week before the album was released. But because of that, Jackson, because it was like the national hymn and they're turning into that ghastly rock and roll, although I don't really call this a rock and roll album, to be honest with you. There's some elements of rock in here, but this is more prog, jazz, classical. Yeah, it's a lot closer to classical than it is to rock and roll, if you ask me.
I mean, there's really hardly any guitar in this.
That's right. In fact, and the guitar is played by Greg Legg. He's a bass player. He's also a pretty good guitar player. But he's more of a strummer than a wailer. And the BBC banned it from the radio, and that was really the only station they had. I think even pirate radio was gone at that point. Maybe you could get it from another country or something like that, but it's not going to be played on BBC, so it kind of gets shut down. Now in America, of course, they played other songs on the radio.
So then my question is, why did you release this as a single? Like, did you not know this was going to happen? That's odd to me. I mean, you're touching the nerve here, and not really the way to sell your record.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they thought people have gotten past that, or like, oh, see, people know it, so we'll go ahead and put it out. I don't know. I mean, they're not exactly the United States of America. You're talking about Jesus. Shut that down. They're not that way, at least not all of them. So I don't know. I mean, it's short. It's not even 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hymn.
Yeah.
But it's a proggy hymn, but it kind of kicks you off like, okay, this is the direction that we're going. It was arranged by the three of them, but the lyrics are William Blake. And then the second one, Toccata, again, very highbrow here, an adaptation of Alberto Ginastera's first piano concerto, the fourth movement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, another one we used to listen to quite a bit.
In college, we would go out and get a case of Busch Light and then listen all the time.
Make sure it's the fourth movement, please. Thank you.
Exactly. I don't have time to listen to that dreaded third movement. Just the fourth movement, please. But this is a little dark. This kind of fits the album cover a little bit better, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. And it's totally instrumental. So again, that's not something that we're used to. Other than, a minute and a half, 2 minute, maybe, guitar and drums instrumental. Yeah. About the 4:30 mark, it kind of changes. It gets dark and you don't know what's going on. There's the phaser stuff at about the 3 minute mark.
Yeah.
He's having a good time with with his new toy.
The Moog Apollo, no doubt about it. It's cool. Yeah. There's all sorts of space age sounds in there, but you got to give Carl some credit on these drums right now. The drums and the percussion throughout this are pretty cool, but honestly, it's hard to listen to at some times. And then once you get towards the end, the computerized bits that are on there, again, from Keith's new toys, they were likely super cool and groundbreaking in 1973. But now it's not quite the same. It's like, yeah, those are a little dated. It sounds like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and not in a good way.
Yeah.
Because 2001 was 22 years ago, and it wasn't that great.
So you wonder too, if you were sitting there listening to this live, and that was one of the other things too. They wanted to make make an album that they could play live,
right? And
so to see it played live, it must have been something to behold in 1973. You'd never seen anything like this, and I think that the other thing is, and we'll get into this later, the Karn Evil was actually something else before it. It was like Gantis 9 or something,
right? Out of a mythical planet or whatever,
something. So this kind of goes along with that. Like this, we're having an outer space adventure here.
Yeah, you're right. No, and the previous album trilogy, they'd used like 24 tracks and they tracked all sorts of stuff on there. Mm-hmm. Yes, it makes amazing music, but it's very hard to recreate live. And I also, from what I understand about ELP, obviously I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, but they were much better live than they ever really were captured on the record.
Okay.
Right? Like the records maybe didn't sell through the roof, but to see them live was really something. Probably because the three of them together are such fantastic musicians, and you give them a chance to, space out and really jam and stuff. They could do some really killer things. So you're right. They decided, hey, let's do something. We can play the whole thing live. But this one is, Emerson must be jumping back and forth between different things on this,
And when you go and you watch a classical performance, like with an orchestra, as we've done a million times, they all have music.
Right.
You're looking at music.
They follow it.
Correct.
Yeah.
And when you get to the end of the page, turn it, you go to the next one. How they do this without music, I have no idea. No clue how you would memorize something this. If you got 3 chords,
that's easy.
A, B. Okay, good. We got that. But to do this out of your head, no idea how this works.
Yeah, and 7.5 minutes is a long time for all this spacey bloop bloop kind of computerized stuff.
And there's no beat to it. Like there's nothing to fall back on. Like, sometimes like if you get lost, you're like, okay, I know what the drummer's doing. You're on your own. You got 3 parts playing independently, and good luck. So
I admire them for reworking something that existed into something really cool, using all this great technology, but it's not something you're going to tap your toe to and listen. You like sit and scratch your chin like, listen to what they're doing here, But I don't see myself listening to it a lot.
This
certainly not outside the context of the record.
Correct. This whole thing is an investment. Like you have to say, I mean, what is it, 40 something minutes long? You have to say to yourself, okay, I'm putting this thing on, and for 42 minutes, I'm going to listen to every note that they're playing. This is not a casual, like, you're in the car and Toccata comes on, and you're like, yeah, I'll listen to this while I'm doing that or mowing the lawn or whatever. This is, I mean, I listened to this probably 2 or 3 times just laying on the floor with my eyes closed.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Just trying to focus on like,
correct.
God, what all are they doing now?
Yes,
yeah.
Right. And the different things and the sound effects firing and the drums coming in. Yeah. It's insane.
It's crazy. So then we scoot along here to Still You Turn Me On. Now, this is a very big departure from everything else on the record.
This is your, I need some sherbet here to cleanse my palate a little bit, because that was a lot.
That was a lot to take in.
Yeah.
And I think they also felt like, all right, we need something to balance out all this crazy stuff we're doing here. So this is kind of a ballad. It's acoustic. It's almost kind of a madrigal Renaissance feel to it. It's also very short. It's under 3 minutes. And Greg wrote and did the music for this song. It's the only one that he did on his own on the album. Now, it doesn't fit with everything else they're doing on the album, but it's a very nice song.
Wanna be an angel, you wanna be a star, wanna play some magic on my guitar, wanna be a poet, you wanna be my string, you could be anything. Do you wanna be the lover of another? Undercover, you could even be the man on the moon.
Yeah, and I can't believe that. I think it was slated or thought of as being a single, but there's no Carl Palmer on this, so maybe that's why they said we're not doing that. But yeah, it's definitely a departure. It's kind of what you need though at this point in time. If you went into another one like Toccata, your head would explode. Like you got to breathe for a minute. And to me on this one, the bass is cool. I think with Emerson and Palmer in the band, Greg Lake doesn't get enough accolades as being a bass player. So he kind of gets to flex out a little bit here. And his voice is awesome. I mean, just kind of like John Wetton. Like you've heard his voice a million times, but if you really listen, you're like, yeah, he really can belt this out.
He is a very strong vocalist.
Yeah.
And a good bass player and a solid guitar player and songwriter, producer. He's a talent. There's no doubt about it. You couldn't be in King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer if you weren't.
Right.
But I think you're right. Between there not being Carl Palmer on this track and the fact that, your first single is usually what you use to get people to buy the record, right? It's like, this is what the album's all about, come get it. But because this was so different than everything else that they did on the record, they say, no, this is not a good representation of what the record is.
Maybe, yeah. If you led with this and people bought the record because of this, they would have said, now, wait a minute.
Yeah, the rest of this is crazy, yeah. Because this could be a very nice pop song, a love song, if you will, something light. And then you hear the rest of this, you're like, I should have just bought the single, So I think that had something to do with it. But yeah, the Jerusalem single got dropped by the BBC. So it's like, okay, well, now you don't even have a single. So get to work on the next one. But I do like this. And you know what? We heard some similar sounds, the madrigal Renaissance sounds from Genesis at the time, also mixing in some of the keyboard stuff. So I like it. Never heard it before.
Yeah.
Thought, you know what? That's a nice song.
Yeah, absolutely. And something to kind of tide you over. Cause I think that did they start with what would become Karn Evil and they just built everything around it? Or did they say, we're just going to we need a couple more singles to throw on here to make this a longer record? Yeah, no.
So I think Karn Evil, that whole suite was the main thrust of the album. Like, okay, we know this is going to be kind of our signature on this album. It was so long at, more than 25 minutes. If you take all 4 parts, 16 minutes, call it 21 minutes. Yeah, it's like 30 minutes. Okay, it's like 30 minutes. That doesn't fit on a side of an LP because they probably, if it was 22 minutes or something like that, they might have just put it all on side 1. But I guess they didn't want to start it on side 1 and then have to finish it on side 2 just a little bit. So they gave you the other songs, some of which could be singles, first. And then the last song on the first side is Karn Evil 9, First Impression Part 1, all 8+ minutes of it. But before we get to that, we have to talk about the shortest song on the album, Benny the Bouncer. This is a comedy song.
Correct. Yeah, it does not fit with anything else. Again, we've switched gears. I think that Lake he sounds a lot like Roger Daltrey on this one. He's got, the just kind of, he's yelling more than he's singing. And he kind of, he's getting into the more of the slang terms.
Yes.
Yeah. And I thought this was really weird. I'm like, this doesn't fit. It's weird. But then when you go into the rest of this, and you think about, okay, this is supposed to be, now we've reimagined the space adventure to a carnival, right?
Right.
To me, this is almost like the intro to the carnival. This is a little preview or coming soon or something like that. So when I think about it that way, it actually makes more sense to me.
Benny was the bouncer at the Palady dance. He'd slash a granny's face up, given half a chance. He'd sew you back to pieces, all for less than half a quid. He thought he was the meanest until he met with Savage Sid. Now Sid, he was a greaser with some nasty boots. He pulled a pint of Guinness over Benny's boots.
Now that you say that, it does make sense to me too. Like if you're entering the carnival, you got to have someone at the gate to keep the rowdies out, right? Or to collect the money or whatever. So you have to have a bouncer. And yeah, Benny was the bouncer at the Palais to dance. He slashed your granny's face up, given half a chance. Okay, yeah. He thought he was the meanest until he met with Savage Sid. And then they talk about how Savage Sid poured a pint of Guinness over Benny's boots, and then they get into it. Sidney grabbed a hatchet, parry it in Benny's head. This is the end of a Ted, like the Teddy Boy. But, I guess it's just funny. They try to stick together all his bits that would fit, but some of it was missing, and part of him arrived too late. So now he works for Jesus at the bouncer at St. Pete's Gate. That's very British to me. This is very British. And again, Genesis, and I know Steve Hackett did kind of comedy stuff, bits on some of their albums in the mid 70s here. Mm-hmm. That doesn't really work on straight rock, but you've kind of got this license with prog. You're already so out there anyway. Why not have a bit of fun?
Right. And if you're trying to do a concept that people buy into, then yeah, this could just be part of it. And you just need to, putting this record on, you're going for a ride, and you just need to hold on. And this is part of it. Exactly.
Now, the interesting part to me is that Pete Sinfield, who did the lyrics for King Crimson, again, King Crimson, maybe that's something we should explore on first listen.
Okay.
He did the lyrics for this. And I guess he was working on a solo album. And Greg's like, hey, tell you what, you can't get that solo album released. We've got this Manticore label. You can release it here, but I mean,
well,
need your
I have
help.
You here.
Yeah. Why don't you come give me some lyrics for this silly song about Benny the Bouncer? So, you're right. It does kind of fit with the whole weird carnival thing. Stand alone. It's completely odd, but this is album-oriented rock. This is, you don't just hear 3-minute single. You're hearing this whole story put together. So in the context of the record, it has its place.
So then maybe you go back to the whole Manticore Records deal. If they were trying to get this exact thing done on Atlantic, would they have said, you are out of your mind, we are not doing this?
Right. Probably so.
Yeah. I mean, there's no, the single you want to put out is the English national anthem. You've got this other one that you're not really super happy about. And then you've got this 38-minute suite of stuff. Yeah. I don't smell sales on any of this.
I don't either. No, seriously though. Yeah. I mean, it's odd, but somehow it all works.
Right.
You get to Karn Evil First Impression Part 1, damn near 9 minutes long. Again, Peter Sinfield, I think, helped with some of the lyrics. I mean, look, Keith Emerson is a real talent. To me, he is. And it starts with the part you're familiar with in part 2, or at least it sounds similar to it, right? Like, you've heard the part 2 on the rock radio. This is similar. And he does the come inside bit a little bit. But then you hear some electric guitar from Greg Lake, which I knew him as a bass player, and it's sure that he can strum some chords, but he's playing some lead guitar in this bit.
And this is one of those ones where if you heard this, you're like, oh yeah, I know this song. And it could, because you think it's the second one, because there are similar themes. Like, no, wait, we're missing something here. There are, what did I say, about the 5:30 mark, it starts to get into more of what you've more of the second part. Like that sounds more familiar. But yeah, you're right. There is guitar part here, and so this sounds a little more like what we're used to. And I mean, again, I don't think Lake gets enough credit with the other two guys as being a musician.
Supersonic body car. See your hammers at the bars. Come inside, come inside. Roll on, roll on, roll on. Sing the show.
Yeah, and obviously Keith deserves a lot of credit as a composer, as the creator of these instruments that have changed the world, and playing all this crazy stuff and coming up with these sounds. There's no doubt about it. He makes all the music, so he deserves a lot of that credit. And we like Carl Palmer because still, like in his 70s, he could still kill it on the drums. Can you imagine how good he must have been in his 20s? Unbelievable is how good he was. So yes, but Greg Lake, and he's singing lead. He switched from bass to guitar. It's cool. And you're right. In the middle, it kind of changes into something like, okay, I have heard of this. Is this the hit? No, it's not. But it's kind of the beginning of this big suite, this very proggy suite of the evil carnival, where odd things are happening. And we'll get into some of the other stuff here later.
Yeah.
But so there's some lyrics on this one. They're very similar to the lyrics on part 2, which we're about to get to. The third part is pretty much just an instrumental, which is the second impression, not the third part, the second impression, because the first impression has parts 1 and part 2, of course.
Right.
And then the third impression, well, okay, then we get into some lyrics that we'll talk about. But so that's your first side, right? Jerusalem, Toccata, Still You Turn Me On, Benny the Bouncer, Karn Evil, 9, first impression part 1. Do you think a lot of people couldn't wait to flip it over? You think a lot of people are like, oh my God, what the hell did I just buy?
There were probably people that said that. And now that I'm thinking about this, it would have been very strange to have the original vinyl and have this. So you're looking at it and you see, okay, I've got this thing coming up. It's got 3 movements or 3 impressions, 4 different parts. Okay. But you only put the first part on the first side. So after this, now I have to stop, get up, go over to the hi-fi, flip it over, and start again. I don't know. I think if you bought in on impression part 1, you're like, well, let's flip this over and see how this ends.
Yeah. If you dug that, then obviously like, wow, okay, yeah, let's flip that over.
Right.
But I bet there are some people like, oh my God, what did I just buy?
I need a cigarette and a walk around the block now because I just got beat up for half an hour.
And then what's funny is, I guess when they first put it out on CD, they kept the break between part 1 and part 2. But then on subsequent releases, they squished them together, kind of the way they were, God intended it, if you will, or the way Keith Emerson intended it. Whomever you worship is fine with me.
Hi, this is Steve Hackett. You're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
But look, this is the hit. Karn Evil 9, first impression part 2. This is the hit. This is what you hear on the radio. Come see the show. It's rock and roll. You knew it. You've known it for years. You just didn't know what it was called.
Right, or where to find it even.
Well, yeah, that too.
So, and I understand that this was a thought piece also. And I think it makes more sense if you kind of have a little bit of a description of what he was going for. And I guess the first impression is that it's the world has fallen apart and it's, we're in the future now. And so, okay, I get that. I mean, if you go back and listen to it again, okay, maybe I'm picking that up. And then now the second impression is kind of the exhibits that show you what the world used to be like, or what only rich people can afford, or something like that. Okay, so now I get you're actually walking through this thing and seeing all of these amazing things that you can't find anymore in nature.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. We're so glad you could attend. Come inside, come inside. There behind the glass stands a real blade of grass. Be careful as you pass. Move along, move along. Come inside, the show's about to start. Guaranteed to blow your head apart.
Right, because the first part was like roll up, see the show. You know, we see a stripper in a till. What a thrill! What a thrill! You know, with our hands behind our back, we'll pull Jesus from a hat. You know, all that kind of stuff. You're right. Now they're in the future, and like, you know, come inside, come inside. There behind a glass stands a real blade of grass. You know, because we don't have those anymore.
I think the other thing too on this one that makes it, even though it's kind of out there, it sticks in your brain because he's rhyming all of these things, glass and grass. Okay, so it's easy to come back to, or when you hear it on subsequent listens, it sounds more familiar because of the rhyming words, even though it's kind of nonsensical what he's saying. So I think that helps with memory retention and, oh yes, I know this song.
Right. Performing on a stool, we've a sight to make you drool. 7 virgins and a mule. Keep it cool, keep it cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a carnival. Come and see the show. Come and see the show. See, that's the other thing. You hear "Welcome Back, My Friends" to the show that never ends. Like, that hits you. Oh, okay, cool. The show never ends. And then we come inside, come and see the show. But they don't really listen to the whole, you know, performing on a stool, 7 virgins and a mule, right?
Yeah.
Like, what? Huh? No, I didn't hear that. You know,
Man, don't worry about it. We move past that. We're
come inside, right? It's all good, you know. Great work by Keith on this one. Carl's in lockstep. Yes, it's nice to hear something that's familiar. I think that, like, if we do a Frank Zappa album or something one day where we know nothing, like nothing, like we've at least heard this song. Right. This is familiar. This is like a foothold for us. Like, okay, I've never heard any of the rest of this, but this I know, and I know what to listen for.
This is a safe place.
Yes, exactly. Exactamundo. I don't know. And, you know, I guess people just realized, hey, this is actually pretty darn good, right?
And pretty catchy too.
Yeah, exactly. This is good stuff on it. So we should play this on the radio. And they have in America for a very, very, very long time. But you know, it didn't really chart because there's nowhere to chart. It was not released. It's just one of those rock radio classics.
And it's long too. I can see why this would not have been a single. I mean, what I'm guessing is that it just kind of caught on, and that's why people play. That's why DJs would play this.
Because we did have Carl Palmer on the show famously last year, and he talked about how, look, in America in the 70s, you could get anything played on the radio.
To understand that by the time you got to the end of the 70s, American radio was not like it was. American radio was an art form, and you could get anything played on American radio, and it was unbelievable. And English musicians used to just talk about, wow, over there you can get a prog track played in drive time, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That to us was, unbelievable. I mean, it was difficult to do that in the 70s here in UK, but in America you could. At the end of the 70s, all of that stopped. It all went corporate, and DJs were told what they could say.
And obviously, because this was played on the radio and became a radio hit, even though it may not have been a chart-topping hit, it's a radio hit. I think that's why he was forced, basically, in Asia to kind of cut everything down to pretty short. But look, I like it. It's probably what helped sell it in America quite a bit. Although, I mean, I got a feeling that their live show is really what did it. And their next album was their first live album, which was, it's Welcome Back, My Friends, to the Show That Never Ends, Ladies and Gentlemen. So they toured on this, and they made a live album. And I think this went to number 2, this album in the UK.
This one or the live one?
This one. Okay. It went up to a number 11 in the US, but the live album, I think, was number 4 or something like that in the UK, and number 6 in the US. So, and that's the best they ever did. So this era is kind of the golden era. I had those backwards. It was number 4 in the US. It was number 6 in the UK, and it went gold in the US. So there's back-to-back gold albums for these guys. So, I mean, this is kind of the height of their power, I would say, as far as sales go, certainly in the US.
Yeah. And probably in looking at this too, that the height of like prog rock in general, I mean, I think you were going to get, so what was the 73? I mean, you were going to have kind of the decline of this, like it almost got too big to keep going, with I think they each had, I saw a video clip where they had like Emerson, Lake, and Palmer had their own like semi trucks with their name on the top of it. I mean, the amount of work that it took to bring this around, I think people just got to the point where they're like, we really can't make a ton of money doing this. We need to strip it down. but yet that's what people were going to see, was this giant over-the-top show.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you get to 76, 77. All of a sudden, punk is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And punk was there to destroy stuff like this.
Correct.
Basically. And I don't think they lasted. I mean, I think they broke up in 78 or maybe 79, something like that was their last kind of time together. So I don't know if it was the writing on the walls, look, no, it's all punk and what you guys do is tired. Or it's like, you know what, we've been doing this for a while and we've made some money. So it's fine that we can go do other things now. I don't know. We're not ELP experts. We want to know everything, but we don't. And that's why we're doing this on First Listen series. So we can learn about stuff we don't know.
Or learn about stuff that you kind of know. Like I saw it over in the corner and I've been, curious for a million years. But like I said, had we not done this, I don't think I would have ever listened to it. I would have never have sat down and said, okay, Saturday afternoon, boom, I'm going to take my time and listen to this whole thing. Probably not.
Probably not. But then we would have missed out on some good stuff. Now, look, this Karn Evil 9's second impression, it's an instrumental. It's cool. No, look, it's an instrumental, so it's not going to appeal to everybody. Mm-hmm. It's really jazzy at first to me, first 3.5 minutes or so. And then at 3.5, it kind of slows down.
Yes.
And then there's this weird, creepy sounds coming out of everywhere. Emerson is on his weirdo game again. But then it ramps back up and becomes very classical. So to music appreciators, I think you'll really like this. To rock and roll heads, to hard rockers, you don't want to listen to this. Seriously. But I mean, if you can appreciate good music in all its forms, I think you'd like it. It's 7 minutes. It's a bit of a listen, but I think you'll like this one.
Yeah, and I like the, I don't know, it sounds like steel drums. I don't know, apparently Palmer's 2,000 or 2-ton kit had a whole bunch of electronics that he could trigger also. So I don't know if he actually had real steel drums or if that was electronic, but that's what it sounds like to me. And you're right, at about the 3:30 mark, it gets dark and almost kind of becomes, you kind of think you've changed into something else, but you haven't. It's still part of second impression. And the note that I found is that this movement or this impression is now computers scheming against humans, it's kind of to take over. So again, when I go back and listen to it with that in the back of my head, okay, maybe I hear that, we're moving into Skynet taking over the world here.
Right. Yeah. So we're more than 10 years ahead of Terminator, coming out, because that's really when artificial intelligence kind of popped up on our radar, I would say. Of course, now artificial intelligence is all the rave, and they're talking to us about how do we use artificial intelligence to make our podcast better. And I'm like, yeah, let's just stay away from that for now.
I know how it ends. Okay. So stop that.
Exactly. I don't want to do that, but you're right. The third and final impression, which is fairly long here. It's 9 minutes. It's the longest bit on the album. It is kind of all about the artificial intelligence taking over for the human intelligence. And you talk about the guy on the ship is like, all right, well, let's let the computer tell us something here, right? Let's see what he has to say. No man yields who flies in my ship. Danger. All right, well, let the bridge computer speak. Load your program. I am yourself. And then there's kind of a fight between the humans and the computer. No computer stands in my way. Only blood can cancel my pain. Guardians of a nuclear dawn. Let the maps of war be drawn. And there's some great musicianship in here, but then, it's rejoice. Glory is ours. Our young men have not died in vain. Their graves need no flowers. The tapes have recorded their names because computers didn't have chips, to hold stuff the way they do now. It was all on tapes.
Tape, yeah.
So that's all they could think of.
It's interesting to me too when Lake comes back in, with rejoice, victory is ours. It almost sounds like now his vocal styling now is like Jerusalem, like it's going back to the kind of the hymn. So to me that ties that part of the record into the beginning and the end kind of together.
True, yeah, that's right. Kind of the beginning and the almost like majestic, a reprise. Yes,
yeah, correct.
And hey, I am all there is. I let you live. I am perfect. Are you?
Rejoice, glory is ours. Our young men have not died in
very interesting. And considering the time we live in where AI is starting to take some things over, and it is probably going to be the death of all of us.
You heard it here first.
This is very
Say we
prescient.
didn't warn you. Yes.
And it's cool because it's brand new to us. It's been around 50 years, but we had no knowledge of it. So to discover that they were talking about this 50 years ago, when yes, the big computers relied on all those tapes. I mean, I think the first instance of a big computer I ever saw was in war games, right? The Whopper. Yeah.
That's exactly when you were saying that. I'm like, hey, he's talking about the Whopper.
He's talking about the Whopper, yeah. And all those tapes that would spin around and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And that's part of why the Moog, that Apollo thing he bought, was a story and a half tall, because to fit all these bits together, you would have all these cords and all this power, and it's crazy. Now we have more power in our phone than he ever had in that Moog. It's true. So it's quite an undertaking. And Emerson is voicing the computer bit, the technological computer voice that kind of talks back to Greg Lake. That's Keith.
Okay.
And then the end, you can kind of hear it. It's quadraphonic. You can hear it. It kind of swirls. It goes through circles in your stereo. So if you had like surround sound, it would circle around you, which at the time was pretty state of the art and pretty cool.
Yeah. The one thing, the interesting part about this too to me is it just ends. Like it kind of has like a little, it's the computer comes back in, it's making the beeps and squeaks there, and then the whole thing just ends at the end of the record. So it's like, is the computer dying? Is that its last gasping breath or whatever? But literally when that ends, I'm like, wait, is that it? Are we done? What's going on here? Like I thought there would be a little something to come in at the very end to kind of put an exclamation point on this, but it just stops.
Yep. 45 minutes of weirdness and musicianship and stuff to piss off the British government and all sorts of great stuff on there. So final, your final evaluation of it. Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. What do you think?
I would say, okay, so it depends on what we're talking about. If you're talking about like, would I love to listen to this? Like, could I never, or would I say, I can listen to anything. Let me put this on. Probably not. But can I listen to it and appreciate the songwriting, the composition, the musicianship, the vocal stylings? Absolutely. And can I appreciate how this was one of the cornerstones that built on into the next generation of music and how it still impacts people today? Absolutely. But I really don't see myself ever saying, well, I'll listen to anything. This is the one.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I honestly, I bought an ELP best of set during the pandemic, but other than that, I've never really listened to a lot of ELP. I'm like you, I can appreciate this, and I appreciate their individual talents and how they put it together to make some stuff that not everybody could make, but not all of it's very listenable. And I certainly wouldn't put it like if you had people over to the house. I wouldn't even put it on in the background, Yeah, exactly.
Well, because that's the thing. It's not background music. Like you have to really pay attention to what they're doing. And it takes a lot of mental capacity, or not mental capacity, but it takes a lot of energy to listen to this. Like it's not a light fare.
Right. No, you have to focus. There's a lot to absorb. But of course, we never really had the chance to see them. I mean, I guess we did, because they did get back together in the 90s, but still we didn't know anything about them. And then in about a year's time, both Keith Emerson and Greg Legg died. And I felt really bad for Carl Palmer at that time, because it was like, okay, he's gotten kind of he's obviously near the end of his career. He was 2016, 2017, but he's got two bands. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Asia. They can both go out and tour when they want to. They can release a live album if they want. They've got all sorts of greatest hits and stuff like that. But Keith Emerson, sadly, took his own life in March of 2016. Apparently he had, I don't know if it's called dystonia. It was some kind of odd disease. It was a little bit like arthritis, but it makes it very hard to play. And he was going to go out and do his final tour, and just the internet was awful to him. Like, don't waste your money. He can't play anymore, stuff like that. I also think that he had some alcohol problems, and he ended up taking his own life, which is sad. It's a sad way for him to go, because he was so talented and a very special, gifted composer and player. And it sucks that he would just listen to all that stuff. But then later that year, December, Greg Lake succumbed to cancer. So, okay, now there's no more ELP. Well, at least Carl Palmer still get Asia, and they're touring with Journey in 2017. Back on top, right? No, then John Wetton dies in 2017. So within a year, all three of those guys die.
Yeah.
And Carl went from having, I got these two great bands and they're back together, to like, it's all kind of falling apart. Now, I know that Asia's still trying to get together in some way, and Carl has done his own Carl Palmer's ELP experience, where basically, and thanks to the trust, I guess, of his former bandmates, he can pipe in their music and he can play along to it and put some videos of them up live behind him. So now that I've heard this, I'd be curious to see that.
I would be as well. I mean, to hear it live and also to support Carl, because like you said, he had that run of, hey, I got too much stuff to do. Oh boy, now I got nothing to do.
Right.
I would like to see him, at least him, play live.
Yeah, no, I'll support Carl Palmer no matter what he does. And I know that this summer he did a short run in America to kind of do that ELP thing. I don't know if he'll do it later this year or he'll do it in 2024 or not. Who knows? But it's cool that he decided to kind of keep the music alive, working with the estates of both Keith and Greg, and keep it going, because once he's gone, then that's it, and there's no way for people to have any kind of authentic ELP experience.
Yeah, which is too bad, because going through this, I really am disappointed that, we were very little in 1973,
yes.
Extremely little, that we didn't get to see this live, because this was one hell of a show.
Exactly. What they put into it, what they did, it's pretty impressive, if you ask me. Not that anyone's asking, but I'm just saying, man, this is really well done, well composed. I couldn't do it. Maybe you can't tap your toes to it, but if you can appreciate musicianship and you can get beyond rock and roll, which it's taken us a while to do. If we listened to this when we were in college together, we would have been all over Karn Evil 9 Second Impression, and the rest of it would be like, eh.
But I would say, if you are a fan of just rock music in general, you at least need to experience this, because it will give you an appreciation for what you can do with superior, I guess, skill and talent. And just that, I don't know, like it's just there's just so much to digest, but I think you're really better off for it, listening to it, just putting in the time to listen to it. I think you will have a better appreciation.
Yeah, and it's amazing they got all the sound out of three people. I mean, Gentle Giant's got a lot of sound, but they've also got like 6 people or something like that on stage, right? I mean, Genesis has 5, if not more sometimes. So yeah, it's just 3 people. It's not like the Police.
Right.
And I love the Police, they're awesome. But even Rush, I don't even know if can catch up to what ELP are doing right here.
Yeah, it's not the same thing. And to watch Keith Emerson back in the day, jump leapfrog from different keyboards must have been something to watch also.
Well, I hope you like our take on ELP's brain salad surgery. I hope you like this little journey that we're going on with this new segment called On First Listen. Like we always say, we want to know everything about the history of rock and roll, all the minutiae, every band, who wrote the songs, where were they recorded, what are the significance of them. And this is a blind spot for us. Everyone has blind spots, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer was one of them. Even though one of the members of the band is one of our very favorite musicians of all time, you might say, in Carl Palmer. And it's something we've been thinking about for a long time, so we said, all right, let's do it. Let's pick some albums that we don't know, that people have told us over the years, this is great, this is a masterpiece, oh, you got to try and check this one out, and we just never have for whatever reason. And we thought we'd start with Brain Salad Surgery, as it's about to turn 50 here. And it's not exactly our cup of tea. It's not bad. Like we said, we can appreciate it for what it is. It's part jazz, it's part classical, it's part experimental, part avant-garde, part comedy. But it's not something we're probably going to sit down and listen to quite a bit. I do think that having the Karn Evil 9 First Impression Part 2, being familiar from classic rock radio, was a big help in a nice foothold, making sure we had some familiarity with the record, something we could hang our hats on. It's like, oh yes, I know what to listen for here. I know what this is. And my guess is not every single choice we make in the future is going to have that. I think this is something we're going to do several times a year, maybe once a quarter, something like that. And probably something that we will solicit feedback from you, the listener, on as far as what you would like us to go over. But it was fun. I'm glad we did it. I'm glad I'm familiar with this. It's not a total mystery to me anymore. Probably not one I'm going to listen to a whole lot, but I can appreciate the musicianship of Keith Emerson and Greg Lake and Carl Palmer. So we want to know, folks, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? You have to let us know. You email us. It's uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. You let us know the bands, the albums, the DVDs, the concert, the books, the rock properties you want to hear us talk about. We want you to download and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Doesn't really matter where. And just do us a favor. If you're thinking about it, if you like the show, wherever you're listening, go in and give us a positive 5-star review. It is huge for us and helping to find more rock and roll fans like you. Huge to help grow the show and get more guests on, like Carl Palmer. Hopefully you heard the excerpt of him on episode 80, which we did last year. And if you like this episode, you'll probably want to hear that one as well. Thanks as always to Pantheon Pods, as we are a proud member. Check out pantheonpodcast.com, follow at Pantheon Pods, and be sure you go visit our sponsor, rarevinyl.com. I know they've got some great ELP stuff on there. I know they've got some Asia stuff on there. Power 3, Emerson, Lake and Powell. Whatever you're looking for, go to rarevinyl.com. Use the code UGLY. Save yourself 10%, and they will ship it to you all around the world. Hey, guess what, folks? Next week is our 150th episode. If you can believe it, we've made it almost 3 years here. And it's been a real blast for me and Jackson to do these shows and to grow our community and meet folks from all around the world who share the interest and love and passion of rock and roll like we do. And so for 150th, we're going to have a very special guest on that we're incredibly excited about. No spoilers. One spoiler, we did review one of their albums. It is one of my favorites from the 80s, but that's all you're going to get. Okay, they're also on tour right now in North America on their latest album, but that's all you're going to get. So you're going to have to subscribe to make sure you don't miss that show. But until next time, to all you rockers all around the world, be cool and keep doing what you do to keep rock alive.